rise up to a brand new dawning as the passion start to rise. The energy fill the skies.
Welcome back to Good Morning Tobago viewers. I am your host, Luke James Shrim, and we're about to start the conversations this morning. Now, in response to the escalating crime rate, the government of Trinidad and Tobago declared a nationwide state of emergency to curb this alarming trend. Now, while some citizens may understand the why behind this drastic step, significant concerns are arising regarding the how. Now, joining us this morning to give us an in-depth analysis about the state of emergency is attorney at law, Mr. Martin George. Mr. George, good morning.
Good morning to you and Happy New Year to you and your wonderful team at Tobago Updates. And we urge you guys to keep up the good work you're doing on behalf of Tobago and all Tobagonians everywhere.
Thank you very much, Mr. George. Now, I want to jump into our conversations regarding the state of emergency and the role of law enforcement officers. Now, the absence of factors such as accountability, intelligence, and accurate and specific targeting could lead to the S.O.E just being perceived as mere theatrics. Could you walk us through your perspective on this?
Well, the reality is that, a state of emergency is always basically like a last resort measure. It's not something one does, willy-nilly. It's something that is supposed to be carefully planned, prepared, calculated, and, as you say, targeted. So questions have arisen as to whether that is the approach in this case or whether this was just an act of desperation. Now, while we as citizens are happy to see the government taking some step or some action, unless it is underpinned by hard, deep, intensive police work to gather the evidence, get the information, get the intelligence out there in terms of who is doing what, where the guns are being stored, where they're coming from, who are the main players in that supply chain of illegal drugs and illegal guns into the country. Unless you already have that information and you are planning to swoop down and arrest those people, then really and truly, just arresting one or two rubber slippers bandit, that is not really going to solve the problem. And what I was particularly disturbed by is immediately after the announcement, I saw the police embarking upon roadblock exercises. Now, if you are doing a roadblock, that means you have no specific target. You are just, that is just like a scatter shot. You are casting a wide dragnet and hoping that some, major gang leader drives into your arms while you are conducting this roadblock and that you will arrest them. Come on, that's so dated and out of date in terms of modern policing methods and techniques. It's all you're doing is inconveniencing law-abiding citizens who trying to get to and from work or going about their business. That's all you're doing, and you're making this grand pappy show that, the police are out in force. Really? You call a state of emergency to stage a roadblock? You don't need a state of emergency to hold a roadblock. You could do that any day. So, that's where I think the questions continue to swirl around in terms of whether there has been that preliminary preparation for it. And of course, it did not inspire any confidence in anyone that you called a state of emergency. And then afterwards, it looked like you were hastily scrambling to draft the regulations for the state of emergency. I mean, where does that ever happen? You're supposed to have your regulations prepared and everything even before you do the announcement. So therefore, you could now roll out everything at once. But you saw it took like almost 12 hours for them to produce what appeared to be very hastily drafted and crafted regulations, which people are already criticizing because of some of the provisions that are there and some of the lack of safeguards that seem evident in that regard.
Yes, Mr. George. And it's really easy to pinpoint that this SOE just seems so abrupt. It just came out of nowhere. And you would have articulated in your response a very important question: where are the guns coming from? Because it has been stated that the primary targets of the SOE are individuals who are empowered to easy access of these illegal firearms, such as AK-47s and AR-15s. However, Mr. George, this effort operates against the backdrop of a country which everybody knows has a highly porous border security, which has facilitated some of the import of this firearms in the first place. Now, implementing a state of emergency to address illegal firearms while also maintaining inadequate border control is come like, Mr. George, like you're trying to catch water with a strainer. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you're quite right. I mean, because in other words, if you don't address the supply chain, and that's why I keep stressing there, because we've had in the past our politicians speak repeatedly about Mr. Big, and they know who the big players are in the illegal gun and illegal drug trade. Then those are the people you should be using the state of emergency to go and arrest. As I say, going on hold a roadblock exercise, and then you're locking up a man for having a broken tail light or, and a non-functional headlight. What stupidity is that? That's not the purpose of a state of emergency. Then you saw an announcement, I think yesterday, where they indicated that they arrested 46 persons since the state of emergency. Then tell us, who are these people? Let us know what are their roles and positions in the illegal gun trade or the illegal drug industry. Let us understand that this thing really is making sense. Because as I say, if you just hold, the people at the bottom of the food chain, then you're not solving any problem. Because those bottom feeders are easily replaced. You need the people at the top of the food chain, the top of the supply chain, who really are the ones that are creating the monster in the first place. So if you don't deal with it, it's like, you're trying to fill a leaking bucket. The bucket has a hole in the bottom. You know it has a hole in the bottom, but yet still you're opening the pipe wider, thinking, well, okay, yes, if I pour more water in, it's going to stay in the bucket. No, it will continue to leak out because you haven't addressed the fundamental problem that you're facing.
All right, Mr. George, and based on everything you would have explained to us, is it safe to say from your professional opinion that this state of emergency isn't going to have any benefit when it comes to really tackling the serious crime we are seeing here in Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, I would not say that. I am still willing. I'm always very respectful, and I'm willing to give the government the benefit of the doubt that maybe they have done the homework, that they do have the intelligence, that they do have the data, the knowledge, the information, that this can yield results. I'm always optimistic in my outlook, even though I may be critical of the approach and methodology employed, but I'm still willing to hope that the TTPS really has, in other words, you are supposed to start up this SOE with a list of specific targets that you are going for. But it's not just having a list of targets. You're supposed to have the evidence, the information. You were supposed to have conducted your wiretapping exercises because we have the Interception of Communications Act, right? So therefore, you should have had all your information where you have intercepted their communications, where this one is saying, well, yes, we're moving a shipment of guns here, we do, that kind of thing. And therefore, now you have a specific individual, you're going after, you have the evidence, and therefore, you have something that you can charge somebody and bring it to court, in what should hopefully be a successful prosecution. It cannot be that you are using this as a fishing expedition. So, I mean, as I say, I am still willing to give the government and the TTPS the benefit of the doubt that maybe they do have the background information and that they did all their homework quietly behind the scenes, for months prior to the announcement of this state of emergency. And it wasn't just that somebody woke up one morning and decided, well, look, as a last act of desperation, let's call a state of emergency. I want to hope that this was something that was planned, well thought out for months, and you did your research, you're deviling, you're digging for your information, you're gathering and you're culling of your sources and your informants. So therefore you have everything, all your ducks lined up in a row. So therefore when you arrest somebody, you're able to confront them and say, hey, listen, I already have all the evidence on you. Look what we have. We have this communication we intercepted. Listen to this. That is your voice there. You're speaking to this person. You're telling them ABC. All right. Look, we have photographs. We have video footage where we were conducting undercover operations, conducting surveillance of you. I mean, now this is the kind of thing you see in, normal civilized countries where the hard police work is done in advance. I don't know if our TTPS has really been doing all of this, in terms of doing any undercover work and that kind of thing. I honestly cannot say. All I can say is that I hope that they did so already, because you can't be waiting now to start doing that. That's not the purpose of the state of emergency. You should have done that before. So let's wait and see what the results are.
Understood, Mr. George. And at this moment, I would like you to elaborate on the balance between citizens' rights and the state of emergency. If this S.O.E is not executed properly, the government solution can basically create more problems if the state of emergency ends up being a replica of what we saw in the year 2011, where we saw damage to the police service's reputation. So many unlawful arrests were made, and that in turn would have cost the state so much money. Please elaborate on the balance between citizens' rights and the state of emergency.
Right. So that's why I tell you, a state of emergency is not something one calls lightly. It is really an extreme measure. I mean, as you would imagine, this made international headlines, because once a country declares a state of emergency, it's like everybody's like, wow, what could cause that, So therefore, we made international headlines. It was on all the major news media around the world. All right. So the reality is that it involves a suspension to some degree of the constitutional rights of citizens. In other words, your fundamental rights are suspended during the period of that state of emergency. Now, it's all supposed to be for the greater good. And it's all supposed to be for a limited time and for a specific purpose. If you recall, during the pandemic, we declared a state of emergency because of a public health crisis. And everybody understood the reasons for that. So in this case, it is because of, well, what they said, the escalating crime wave and, fear of reprisals, etc. So we are hoping that the suspension of citizens' rights will not go on forever. We are hoping that the police will act in a manner that justifies their arrests, justifies their detention of persons. In other words, they must have the evidence, because that's what happened in 2011. They arrested persons whom they suspected or whom it was alleged are supposed to be either gang leaders or gang members or whatever, what you may call it, but they had absolutely no evidence to back it up. So therefore, when they detained these persons and they then could not move forward with charges, criminal charges against them, and they had to eventually let them go, I mean, it was embarrassing. The entire police service had egg on its face. And then these persons in turn turned around and sued the state, and it's hundreds of millions of dollars we had to end up paying for that folly, because you went in and you arrested persons without having that evidence. So that's why I started this program by emphasizing the fact that the only way this makes sense is if the TTPS has already done its homework and has already gathered and harnessed and culled and marshaled its evidence for each of the individuals that they are seeking to arrest. So that's why I'm telling you a roadblock exercise. If you see any more roadblock exercises as part of the state of emergency, then you could be guaranteed that that means they don't have a clue what they're doing. That means
Okay.
they're just on a fishing expedition, just on a PR exercise to make it look to the public as if, well, yes, we're doing something. Because it cannot be that a roadblock is part of your state of emergency exercise. That makes absolutely no sense. You ought to have had your information and your intelligence beforehand. So, therefore, with this state of emergency, in fact, you shouldn't need more than a week or
Mm-hmm.
two max to be able to say, well, look, yes, we had a list of, 100 persons. We had all the evidence against these 100 persons. We know where they're to be found. And we just swoop down, we grab them. Swoop down, grab this one. Swoop down, grab that one. That's how you're supposed to function. So, I mean, as I say, we wait and see and we keep our fingers crossed, hoping that that work has already been done and that this state of emergency will be justified.
Understood, Mr. George. And before I move on to the next question, there has been some misconceptions because you would have stated the suspension of rights, but we need people to understand that while their rights are suspended, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are terminated per se. Can you just articulate that a bit to clear up the misconception?
Okay, all right. So the thing is, what the state of emergency does, it allows, like, for instance, certain powers of the police in terms of arrest, detention, without what would be the normal safeguards, right? However, this is not something that is to be abused or misused by the TTPS, because if they do so, and you challenge it in court subsequently, and it is shown that they had absolutely no basis. So, say for instance, if some police officer were to use this state of emergency to, say, harass or intimidate political opponents of the government, then that clearly could not be something justified under the powers that were granted by the president. So therefore, in those circumstances, something like that could easily be challenged in court, and of course, once you are successful, you will be given a substantial award of damages. So I mean, I'm just using that as an extreme example, because I
Understood.
mean, we don't have a history of that in Trinidad and Tobago. But I just wanted to make the point that it's not something to be abused. So therefore, even for the ordinary citizen, the ordinary man, if it is that the police say, well, okay, they're coming into your house without a warrant, or without showing you any documentation in that regard, because they're using the powers under the state of emergency, they are supposed to have a basis for that which is backed by evidence. It cannot be that, well, this police officer never liked you and your family, so therefore they decided to, come and harass and terrorize and intimidate you. No, that can't be. And that is something that the courts will always robustly safeguard the rights of the citizen against any such abuse.
Understood, Mr. George. And under the basis of targeting and specific targeting, do you think that the SOE could be isolated to specific areas instead of the entire country?
Well, the thing is, if it is that you are targeting specific individuals, then there may not be a need to even consider isolating it to specific areas. If you are saying that you have done your homework and you have your list of persons you're going after, then wherever those persons may be found within Trinidad and Tobago, you go after them. So there's no need for saying, well, you're going to say, well, this area is a hotspot, so I'm going to have a curfew in that hotspot. There's no need for that, because if you have your list of individuals, then you go out and you find them wherever they are.
Correct.
Trinidad and Tobago is a small place, I mean, they find people in metropolitan cities all the time, in London, in, Ontario, in Toronto, in Washington, where you have millions and millions of people. They use their cameras, they use their technology, they use their facial recognition software, they use their AI software, they use their drones, they use every available technology in developed countries. I'm sorry to have to say that, I mean, because we're supposed to be a sophisticated developed country, but the way our TTPS functions, we seem to be in the dark ages.
Understood, Mr. George. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back from the break, we're going to be chatting a bit more about the SOE and the business sector.